All right, so we were looking at the President's address tonight, possible announcements in the light of a health perspective earlier. Now the question is, can government add new restrictions when the economy has been so hammered by previous lockdown restrictions? We're joined now by Dr. Neva Makgetla, who is a senior researcher, trade and industrial policy strategies tips. Thank you for being with us, Doctor. What do you expect, firstly? What are you expecting tonight?
I think they're going to go quite gentle. In fact, probably more gently than I would like. I suspect we'll see maybe a slightly longer curfew and maybe some more restrictions on alcohol sales, but not a full ban.
And is that the right approach? I mean, given that tourism is trying to recover, controversy about the closure of alcohol sales in the past, restaurants suffering as well. So this is about businesses.
Yes, it is. It's about businesses that are very high risk during a pandemic and that are asking all of us to accept the possibility of a third wave, which would be far worse for the economy, so that they can stay open a little longer. I think we should maybe learn from the experience of the Western Cape, where they insisted on opening up early in December, and the result is they lost the main part of their season just after Christmas. I think if you look internationally, both the World Bank and the IMF have now published studies that show that stricter restrictions actually lead to a much stronger recovery in the short to medium run. So I think that we need to stop letting ourselves be lobbied by businesses that are understandably desperate and look at the real needs of the economy. Right now, mining and manufacturing have almost fully recovered. If we end up with a third wave, that could set them back. So have most of the services, by the way, mostly recovered. The fact is, some businesses during a pandemic, they can open safely or they can open profitably, or they have to develop a new business model. But to insist on returning to the old business model in a pandemic when it's not safe is, I think, highly irresponsible.
So you actually want stricter measures. You feel that government should be really strong here?
The economies, like you look at Latin America, where they've had largely out of control pandemics, and their economies are doing even worse than ours. And we're doing much worse than other economies like China, but also like most of Asia, where they actually controlled the virus and never had a real surge at all. So I think that, and I'm saying both the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have published studies that show that where you bring in restrictions early and you keep them in place until you've really dealt with the pandemic, the economy recovers much more rapidly. I think the real problem is we're kidding ourselves that tourism can somehow miraculously, like a phoenix, emerge from the fire before the fire is out. You know, I mean, the fact is...
But what if the fire is with us for years?
Well, you know, this is why we need the vaccine. But also what they've done in many countries, in Asia mostly, is they've controlled the pandemic. But they did it by locking down hard and fast and for quite a serious period of time, and then doing track and trace and until they could actually control it. Now, I do think we have learned to have more clever restrictions. So what we've discovered is, you know, things like bars that generate sort of very relaxed social gatherings are where you get, and other kinds of entertainment venues, particularly when they're indoors. That's where you get the real super spreader events that tend to drive the pandemic. And there have been many studies showing that bars are really, you know, one of the disproportionately responsible for super spreader events. I mean, churches aren't great, but bars are really, you know, when you look at the studies, by far the worst. And that means that you can leave open most of mining and manufacturing and other kinds of services. You can also develop digital models. I mean, my daughter was in the entertainment business to a large extent, and they just went online as far as they could. And they accepted that they would not be able to safely simply lobby to go back to the exact same kinds of events they had before. And I think that's the kind of responsible attitude I wish more enterprises would take. And it's rough. And I do think government should be providing more support for those industries that simply cannot open safely during the pandemic.
I mean, it is rough given our unemployment rate, given what was happening even before the pandemic. So just to play devil's advocate, what would you say to the people who say, actually, there's mixed research coming out on whether lockdowns even work in the first place?
I say that, you know, you should listen to the science. You know, remember during HIV when people were saying that antiretrovirals don't work also? And yet we knew what the preponderance of the science said. There have been very careful econometric studies done that show that restrictions actually do lead to a fast recovery as well as controlling the virus. I think we should see this as an investment in our future growth rather than simply as a short-run cost. So you need to see it over time and not just at the immediate impact.
Yeah.
And I do think there's always a problem when we do economic policy that, every policy imposes a cost on someone. The risk is when some people bear a higher cost, and we haven't been good about helping them out. But if we let them lobby us to get rid of a policy that actually has very widespread benefits that are diffuse and hard to see, we end up with very bad policies.
Yeah.
So in this case, if we manage to have restrictions and we stop a third wave, there will be many people saying, well, why did we need the restrictions at all? Rather than saying maybe the restrictions actually were what gave us this benefit, that people aren't getting sick and dying, and the rest of the economy can stay open better.
Mm. And you think this is suitable even for a country like South Africa, where, government has all but admitted there is no more money for support. The 350 Rand grant that was a lifeline for many, that's going to run out. So can we look at what's happening in the developed world, where they can move in and support people in entertainment, in tourism, etc., and say that's right for us as well?
Vietnam and China are both upper middle income countries, and they've had much stricter controls than we have. So I think that, some of our peer economies have managed this. It's just the way we have, and managed it better, in fact. What I would argue is we should have made the money available for the social grants. I just think that was the wrong decision. They're 2 billion Rand a month. They support 6 million people. I think we could have extended them. I think that was a social obligation. We have extended the UIF tours to those industries that face restrictions. So they're not full, those things only provide partial salaries, but at least they provide some cushion. But I do think that we also have to be saying, just like we've said, we will spare no expense when it comes to vaccines because the economic benefits are immense. We should have had a similar approach to saying where businesses cannot open, where people simply cannot safely go back to work. It's a very small share of the economy. Tourism accounts for less than 5% of the GDP. And about 5% of employment. If we could have had targeted programs to support those companies, we might have faced less lobbying than what we face now.
Yeah. All right. The money is a problem. So in your ideal address tonight, it sounds like you'd want those gatherings stopped altogether. A stronger curfew. How would it work?
I think a stronger curfew. I think a much better education campaign about wearing masks and about ventilation in particular, which we still tend to not, in my opinion, where the evidence shows that they have a huge impact on safety. There's parts of the world where they've said restaurants and bars can open, but only out of doors, as well as being, with all the other safety measures. And we've never really been good about looking at those kinds of creative solutions that would let people have more economic activity in a safe way, rather than simply having the old model in a way that's not economic. Having said that, no, I think a stronger curfew and stronger restrictions, but not a full ban on alcohol, to me would make sense. But what would really make sense would be much better public education on using masks and maintaining social distance. We say to people, you must manage the risk, but we don't really give them the information they need to do it effectively.
All right, thank you very much. That was Dr. Neva Mokgatle from the Senior Researcher at Trade and Industrial Policies Strategies. Thank you very much. And now let's look at something else. I got to work today, and Tabiso is our award-winning sports anchor is in the studio, but for a different reason.